What are the threat levels of the Knicks competition in the East after a pretty robust start to the offseason where everyone seems to think they have a chance to win the East next year? We're going to debate through all the top teams that the Knicks might have to go through next year right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I'm Alex Wolfe, I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land, and he is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we will be talking through some of the East threats for the Knicks going into this coming season. Been a pretty busy offseason where everyone seems to think with Boston now, with the Tatum injury, and then obviously with the Halliburton injury, two of the potential favorites to come out of the East next year have gone down, and it seems like every team is now in the East thinking that they maybe have a shot to win. So we're going to talk through the Cavs. We're going to talk through the Magic. We're going to talk through the Hawks, the Pistons, the moves that they've made, even the Bucks. They certainly have been active so far. So we're going to talk through all the moves that these various teams have made, and then assign a threat level to them, like the terror threat level. But we're going to assign it to these teams in terms of what level threat we think they are to keeping the Knicks potentially out of the finals or even the Eastern Conference Finals again next year. So we got a pretty robust show for you guys today. But first, I want to thank you all for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking insights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. All right, Gavin, let's get into these teams and not waste any time here because we got a bunch of them to go through. But the Cleveland Cavaliers, number one seed this past year, get knocked out by the eventual NBA final representative of the East, the Pacers. So maybe, and who eventually knocked the Knicks out as well. So, it was easy at the time to be like, oh, the number one seed got felled. But then, obviously the same thing happened to the Knicks in the next round. So it's tough to dunk on them too hard there, especially because they were dealing with some injury issues and whatnot. But they've had not a super loud offseason, but one that, depending on how you look, could have potentially made their team a decent amount better.
Yeah, so just to put this in context, we are going off the MI5 threat levels, which I think is the UK Secret Service. They have low, moderate, substantial, severe, critical. I might throw this right back to you, Alex, because I am genuinely torn between substantial and severe. And I have a feeling you'll be on the lower end of that because I think we always go back and forth on the Cavs. On paper, right, they were essentially just as dominant as the Boston Celtics were against the New York Knicks. I guess they played two close games against the Knicks where the Celtics only played one in the regular season, but it felt like they had a fantastic matchup with New York. The numbers scream that I think if it were not for what Oklahoma City did last year, they would have been recognized as having just like one of the 20 or so best regular season teams in NBA history based on their net rating, based on their wins, based on their style. Incredibly dynamic, like one of the better offenses we've seen in recent NBA history. They had Lonzo Ball, who health contingent, and that is obviously huge for a guy who missed 3.5 years of basketball. That is a major caveat. But if he's 80% of his former self, he only adds on to their size, passing, shooting. He is just a picture perfect fit. They essentially run it back with everyone else, and yet I find it hard to say the Cavs put fear into my heart. And maybe that'll look stupid if they play the Knicks and they beat them in 5 in the playoffs. I know I'm still going back to what happened at this point 3 seasons ago, which is probably stupid. But given the letdown they had against the Pacers, and Cavs fans will rightfully scream, hey, that was our version of what happened against you guys against Indiana last year. Our whole team was injured, which would be totally valid. I still think this team lacks a fundamental toughness at points come playoff time, I think there are some weak spots to poke at, mainly Darius Garland defensively. I think Jared Allen on both ends, especially if the Knicks still have Mitchell Robinson, can be had in the playoffs. Like, I don't know. Like, there's a world where Evan Mobley makes a jump and they are just a different level of playoff team. Right now, I think I've talked myself into substantial more than severe. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go between moderate and substantial. I won't go so disrespectful as to say low, but I'll say between moderate and substantial risk to the Knicks potentially making let's just say the ECF again or even the finals. Like I think they're gonna come back with a vengeance. I think we are going to see maybe they go a little more conservative health wise during the regular season, almost like what we saw. I mean, granted, it's different because the Celtics won a championship the year that they like went so crazy during the regular season. Like they had the
Mhm.
crazy regular season a season ago, and then obviously won the championship. Then this past year, we kind of saw like they kind of took the foot off the gas in the regular season a little bit. It seemed like the regular season wasn't quite the priority anymore. And they even like I think vocally acknowledged that a few times of just like, yeah, like we've gone through it. We've won a championship at this point. Like we're not gonna like go as crazy during the regular season. We're trying to make sure that we're ready to go in the postseason and could potentially win another one. Maybe we see that out of the Cavs this year, where they try to prioritize health a little more than the regular season accolades, which they've never actually.
I will say, Alex, the Donovan Mitchell led them in minutes per game at 31.4. So they kind of, I guess they all played a lot of games. So maybe they sit guys more, but they kind of did that last year, which is
Right.
crazy how good they were. But
I was actually just about to say like they kind of aren't exactly like it's not exactly like they were doing Tibbs level stuff with anybody anyway.
yeah.
So but maybe they just try to prioritize their health a little more, considering
Mhm.
I mean, now it's just like you add Lonzo Ball, like health's a huge concern. Like you have to make sure like he could be a key piece to what they're doing, but it could also potentially like fall apart if he's hurt for most of the year or whatever, which we've seen can be the case in his career. Like he had that really, really, really tough knee rehab for literally like 2.5 years.
Mhm.
And finally was able to put it back together on the court this past year, which is awesome for him. Honestly, like I'm actually really happy for him as like a human being. That's really cool. But there's just like I feel like they didn't do a ton they solidified the big rotation, I guess, a little bit with Larry Nance also, which is good. But like, I think that it's really just going to come down to do they stay healthy and then did like not to oversimplify so much, but like do they just have what it takes to make it further in the playoffs this year? It's kind of just I think that it's fair to ask at this point if Donovan Mitchell is actually like a playoff riser at this point. Um, because it just seems like other than the bubble where he went crazy, there's never really been a postseason where you look at it and go like, oh yeah, he like owned that postseason. Like he was amazing that whole postseason or whatever. And they've had a lot of early exits or earlier than people would think the last few years. So they kind of got something to prove as a whole unit. But yeah, I guess we'll see. But I think they're, I guess I don't look at them as any more or less of a threat than they were this past year. And I didn't think they were like an enormous threat this past year anyway.
Yeah.
But unless you have anything else to add, we could probably move to like the Magic at
No,
this point.
only other thing I'd say is I think Donovan Mitchell's pretty awesome in the playoffs. He's 28 points per game for his career. He's been 29.6 each of the last 2 years. His efficiency was not that good last year because at times he just had to completely carry them. For me, like the concern is really everyone other than him. And I'm going to say Evan Mobley, I feel pretty good at this point about what he could do. Obviously, like we talked about it when we had pods with Danny Cunningham, like the single biggest swing factor for them. If Mobley can shoot threes at a high level, that completely changes their team. But I don't know about Garland. I don't know about Allen. I don't know about the bench. I kind of think they needed to get a more physical big, and I said it before, but I still think Mitch could expose them. So I'm fascinated in them. They're an interesting team. Because in the regular season, like they were undeniably dramatically better than the Knicks, and yet like I don't know if we're wrong for saying that like the Knicks, like especially if they're more optimized under Mike Brown, might be the scarier team in the playoffs. But I think we're both in agreement that the Orlando Magic are probably the next team up on our list, given what happened to Boston, given what happened to Indiana. Obviously, they add Desmond Bane, they add Tyus Jones, they get a steal on Karl Anthony Towns' arch nemesis. He has a bunch of them, but his latest one in Mo Wagner comes back at just $5 million after a torn ACL. Alex, some people were like a little bit down on the Bane move and thought it was like an overpay. I thought it made sense for them. Like a historically bad shooting team. I think there was a stat out there. They were in the low 30s on open jumpers last year in terms of percentage, while Desmond Bane was on like 50% on those shots. I should double check that, but Wagner coming back is big. I think he was, before he got hurt, 13-5 on 56, 36, 72 splits in just 19 minutes per game. They have a ridiculous amount of depth. I mapped out their rotation. I had them, I'm going to count it out. I had them as at 7 playable bench guys, including Jace Richardson, who I thought was one of the best picks in terms of fit in the draft. Anthony Black is going to be a year better. Tristan Da Silva's going to be a year better. You get Jalen Suggs back healthy. I don't like the team. They're annoyingly physical every time they play the Knicks. But I am going to also put them as a substantial threat to the New York Knicks.
I guess I'm just not ready to put them on that level till I see it. Because we thought they were going to take this huge leap this past year. And obviously injuries played a part, but even once they then got healthy beyond those injuries and, pushed towards the playoffs or whatever, it just seemed like something just wasn't quite right there with the Paolo Franz 1-2 punch. And I think maybe that has more to do with Paolo than anything else. Maybe adding a Bane just adds that extra shooter, which will allow him to just get into the paint more, kick out, whatever. Like, I think there's a little bit of like Julius Randle to his game where he could be like a good like driving kick guy potentially, and have good instincts there with that like mid-range ability as well. I feel pretty good about the Bane addition. I think they're another one of those teams where I'm like, I just feel like I got to see it before I can buy into it.
Yeah.
And so for that, I'll probably put them again between moderate and substantial. Like, I don't see like a severe threat here where I'm like quaking in my boots. Like, if I'm being honest, a team that I would consider more severe, well, I'll save it. But like one of the teams we're going to touch on later is a team that like already pushed the Knicks kind of to the brink. And I feel like worse about the Knicks potentially matching up with them than I do with like the Magic, because I just feel like the Magic, other than like the regular season, I don't even know if was that this past season or the season before, that like they just totally had the Knicks number during the regular season.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago.
I think
but
that
the
was
Knicks
2
were
years
just
ago.
never healthy when they played them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, whatever, like regular season results are one thing, but it just seems like the Magic have not really had that like signature playoff performance just yet. They're still kind of waiting on that. And I feel like we got to see that before I'm ready to say like, oh yeah, I think this team is going to stand in the way of the Knicks getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's like the Knicks have a lot of really good DNA on their team in terms of players that have been to that stage a number of times. The Magic just don't quite have that yet. Although Bane was on the Grizzlies, who have had their moments in the playoffs. So I guess you could say they've added some of that now, but we'll see. But for now, I'm willing to just, I don't know if I'm willing to say that like one ball handling shooter will totally change things for them, but I think Bane was a good move, even if it was a little steep.
Yeah, I see those. I see the Knicks, if they play them in the playoffs, very similar to that Pistons series. Ultra physical, ultra gross, a lot of like 94, 88 games. I do think some of the Knicks signings leaning into offense, like I think it would be really interesting against the Hawks against the Magic, and like and how Bane, Franz, Paulo, and to a slightly lesser degree Suggs could hunt specific matchups against the New York Knicks. Because defensively, I don't really see, I mean, this was true last year for Orlando. I don't really see a weak point, and that was their greatest strength in tiring out the Boston Celtics for the New York Knicks, was that they could switch across the board and really hold up. Again, that's a little, even though Suggs is like an all-world defender, that's a little bit harder when you have to play 2 guards instead of like playing Anthony Black and Jonathan Isaac, who are gigantic a little bit more. But man, they're interesting. They're deep. A lot of shooting, great defense. Curious to see what Jamal Mosley does with that group. But we have a bunch more teams to go through. We'll get into it all next here on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make games even more exciting. You're already watching the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups every night, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like watch events. Whether I'm placing a same game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, like I was at the Yankees game the other week, FanDuel makes it easy to feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, what's up, guys? We are back here on Locked On Knicks. For your second listen, be sure to check out our buddies over at Locked On NBA, breaking down Summer League, including our New York Knicks starting on Friday. That's going to be a lot of fun. Super excited for that. I'm sure we'll have a preview for you later in the week. Alex, our next team up, we were in agreement on this. The Atlanta Hawks, who I think pretty clearly had the best offseason of any Eastern Conference team. As much as we are reticent to praise that franchise in general, given the Trae Young animosity, even they fired our guy Landry Fields. But I think over the last 2 years, they have done about as good of a job as you possibly can, mostly by just pillaging the frankly dumb New Orleans Pelicans, both for Dyson Daniels and now an unprotected 2026 first-round pick that they could go trade for another rotation piece if they want, and some lottery luck to get Zachariah Richeche. They have done about as good of a job as you can building around a star in Trae Young without getting multiple superstars as I can remember. This feels like if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy, which is a major if, about as perfectly constructed of a roster as you could have to highlight Trae Young's strengths.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me. If I was gonna start thinking about the threat level, like I actually, for them, I would go somewhere between substantial. Oh, okay. Actually, this could be anywhere from moderate to severe. It's that big of a range
Okay.
to me because if Porzingis is healthy, that's huge. But Porzingis, it's like I don't know what to think as far as his health is concerned because it it was attributed as an illness that he has,
Yeah.
and like I don't know. I mean, like I'm not going to join in on speculation about what his illness is or whatever, but it's just like the fact that it would go away and then come back in waves like it did, and like we saw what it did to him in the playoffs, where he just completely didn't look like himself out there.
Yeah.
So if he has some sort of underlying like major health issue that is still being sorted through or whatever, and just hasn't like if that doesn't get in check going into this season, I have serious concerns about whether he can like be as big of an impact as he's going to need to be. But if he's healthy, then that's perfect. I mean, that's like what every player like Trae Young dreams of having, right? Is a guy that can, that can set a good screen for him, that is a real shooting threat to open up the lane, that, can protect the rim on the other end, and then also can, be up there for a lob threat every once in a while for you too. Like Porzingis, there's a reason that we liked him back in the day, that when he was on the Knicks, like, and thought that he might be the one. Like he's got that skill set that's really desirable in today's NBA, which is a big that cannot be played off the floor under pretty much any circumstance other than like foul trouble.
Mhm.
If he's at his best, like that's great. And then adding Alexander Walker in place of like Karis LeVert, I think is big. I think that's just kind of like a younger, better upgrade who's a better shooter, which is good. And then adding Kennard, just like another pure shooter. You're going to get Jalen Johnson back, hopefully at full health, who I'm super high on.
Mhm.
I think he's really good. Obviously, my stance on Dyson Daniels has been well known since we're covering that draft. Like in our mock draft, he was a Nick, darn it. But I mean, I think he's fantastic. I think he's obviously proved himself this year as one of the best defenders in the entire NBA, bar none. So I mean, if that team really gels, like the Knicks, if they matched up with them, would I think have their work cut out for them, and would have to scheme pretty heavily to work around those shooters, work around Trey's ability to break down the defense, whatever, and all that stuff. They're going to be pretty nasty if this thing comes together the way it should.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I would have them between substantial and I can't. It's hard for me to put them higher than the Cavs. Maybe I'd upgrade the Cavs to between substantial and severe if we're doing betweens. But I'll put them at substantial for now because I think Cleveland would still be my number one threat overall. But man, I am with you. They just totally insulate Trae defensively. For people who did not watch a ton of the Minnesota Timberwolves, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is not just one of the best bench scorers in the NBA. He's one of the better perimeter defenders, certainly for someone coming off the bench. But I think a higher end one in terms of starting guys too. I really don't know what you do. Like, obviously, you potentially lose some of the pick and roll chemistry that Trae has with Onyeka Okongwu, and I think Trae is probably the best lob passer in basketball, so you lose a little bit of that. But if you're running pick and pop with him and KP, like obviously the Tatum KP one, you could switch it because you always had a big forward on Tatum. You can't really switch it with Trae Young and Kristaps Porzingis unless you're putting a big wing on Trae, which like he's just too quick, unlike Jalen Brunson for most wings. So that is just really tough. And the fact that they can both shoot, again, like I guess Jason Tatum can kind of do this, but from like 30 plus feet away from the basket, like that is just a nasty combination. You have shooting all around them. You have athleticism all around them. Ricochet could potentially take another leap. Okongwu is one of the best 2 or 3 best backup centers in the NBA. They just have a lot of good stuff going. As much as I hate it, you tip your cap to the Atlanta Hawks. All right, we had different teams next, but let's start with yours. You had the Detroit Pistons. What threat level would you consider the Detroit Pistons after they pushed the Knicks pretty much to the brink in that round 1 series?
Yeah, I mean they're a team that I would put somewhere between substantial and severe. I think they're gonna get better. I mean, you look at they essentially are returning almost the same roster. I mean, they lose Tim Hardaway Jr., replace him with Karis LeVert, which LeVert's not quite the shooter, but I think will offer more in terms of like backup ball handling, which they're losing some of by losing Dennis Schroeder as well. But they get Duncan Robinson, so they add more 3-point shooting, which I think that having consistent 3-point shooters will be huge for them. I think we saw in the Knicks series, like that was one thing that kind of there was a little inconsistency from guys like Beasley and Hardaway on a game-to-game basis in terms of what they were able to do. Obviously, the status of Malik Beasley a little up in the air in terms of if he'll be back with them or not this year, or with any team for that matter, depending on what happens with this whole gambling issue with him. But they bring back Paul Reed, who I'm not like super high on, but he was pretty good. He had some moments against the Knicks in the playoffs. I just think mostly what I'm betting on here is just a year more of development from Cade with a bench that I think got maybe slightly better around him, or at least stayed the same. That whole team is really young. They're developing really well. I love Oscar Thompson. I love I think Jaden Ivey, who was, Pistons fans will point out was not available in the Knicks series. Like that's a guy that is going to be a big addition to, that lineup again next year. And then obviously in the middle, having, oh my God, why is
Isaiah Stewart?
Isaiah Stewart and coming back.
Jalen Duren,
along with Jalen Duren. Yeah, Jalen Duren's name escaped me for some reason. But having Jalen Duren coming back and getting a year better as well. I mean, I think he's a great rebounder. Like Stewart's a great rebounder, good shooter, somewhat for a big. Like if they decide to use him that way, I think they could be a pretty nasty team. And obviously we saw they have sort of that rep of being like a tough nosed team that is going to get the benefit of the doubt in the playoffs and stuff. And is going to be allowed to set a physical tone in a playoff series, which maybe the Knicks, aren't necessarily as able to do based off what we saw from, how they kind of had to play around however their opponents were playing throughout the postseason. So we'll see, but I think all in all, they look good. I mean, if nothing else, I'm kind of just betting on their development.
All right. I will give my thoughts on the Detroit Pistons, and then we'll move on to some Atlantic Division rivals. All that next here on Locked On Knicks. All right. So I'm a little bit less worried about the Pistons than you are. I would have them solidly as a moderate threat. I could see them making the leap to substantial. I just felt like the Knicks were so far from optimized in that series a year ago. And I still believe, again, hat tip to Detroit, like that was in a lot of ways a coin flip series that more often than not came down to the fact that in the last minute of games, the Knicks had Jalen Brunson and the Pistons didn't, but they absolutely befuddled the Knicks at times. And to your point, their physicality was a difference maker. They were missing, arguably, again, to your point, 2 of their 5 best players in Stewart, who is, at least on paper, if Towns is used optimally, like a much better option to guard Towns than Jalen Duren is, even though Duren, I thought, got substantially better as that series went along. Again, to your point, Pistons fans will tell you Jaden Ivey is their second best player, and he was in the midst of a career season. Like, the big question for him, obviously, is an athletic monster. Like, would he figure out the jump shot? Shot 41% on 5 threes a game last year, which is obviously fantastic for someone who had real questions as a shooter. I am fascinated to see if it works as well, though, with him back, because I think part of what clicked for them, Alex, like, remember, they were a top 10 offense, a top 10 defense, over the final 50 games of the season. That was essentially like right when Ivy got hurt. I think it worked because the ball was always in Cade's hands and he had to do everything. But as good as Ivy is, Cade was just light years ahead. So that is something I'm watching, whether they could actually take a step back. Little Ewing theory with Ivy coming back. I do think Duncan Robinson is a downgrade from Malik Beasley, just because Malik Beasley had one of the 10 or so best shooting seasons in NBA history last year. Obviously, if Beasley is allowed to play and they signed him for the minimum right before the season, then they just got better. Schroeder was just such a Knicks killer. And I know Karis LeVert is probably objectively a better player. I fear LeVert a little bit less than I fear Schroeder. Tim Hardaway was awesome last year. He's gone. Again, Robinson replaces some of that. I don't know. I could see a world where they take a little bit of a step back. The one caveat I will put on that is Asar Thompson, maybe not quite his brother in terms of ceiling, but a guy, if he puts it all together, particularly a jump shot, will likely be an all-star someday. If that leap comes sooner rather than later, I think they are a substantially scarier team. Right now, I look at them and see a slightly less dynamic version of the New York Knicks. But Alex, before we, or you know what, let's skip to my 5th team, and you can tell me, or my 4th team. I'm curious if they're your 5th team. I had the Boston Celtics next, and this is really more of a belief in modern medicine. And I know there's been a lot of talk that since Jason Tatum got the surgery the day after and they were in New York and he had the best possible surgeon, like, there's a world apparently where you can come back from an Achilles in like 6 or 7 months. That seems optimistic. I think Boston has very much telegraphed that they are going to kind of take this year off, maybe try to get onto the back end of the lottery, pull a Mavs and add another superstar to their team that, despite losing Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, is still absolutely loaded. So I would totally understand if you had them way lower, if you didn't consider them a threat at all. I just think if there's any world where Tatum's back and playing something like himself at the end of the season, which, to be fair, we haven't really seen that before with an Achilles, they would still be a very scary team on paper.
I'm going to go ahead and say they are low on mine. Low. I have them. I consider them, I think there's a chance they're possibly in the play-in and possibly like 7 seed or an 8 seed. I don't know. I think they've telegraphed that they don't think that they're going to be able to do this without Tatum, and they don't think Tatum's going to be back. So I'm betting on Tatum not being back the whole season. I feel like they would not want to rush him back, because ultimately, what's your motivation there? Like, you've already made the moves to clear the roster to, get under the aprons and everything, and avoid paying all the luxury taxes and whatever. You've already kind of telegraphed, like, we don't think he's going to be back. So why would you then risk the rest of his prime by potentially rushing him back and bringing him back and having him play on an Achilles that maybe isn't fully healed or something? I don't see that. And I also just think, I think when you go from Drew Holiday, Luke Cornett, Kristaps Porzingis, all guys that murdered the Knicks at various times, to then replacing them with like Georges Niang, Luka Garza, Josh Minot, Anthony Simons, who I think at this point you could pretty safely rank Simons as like, they had to pay to trade Simons to the Celtics for old Drew Holiday, which is crazy, and give them salary relief. Like, it just goes to show what even his previous team thought of him. Like, maybe they turned Simons' career around, but I think at this point you can pretty safely say a scorer and not much else, which, is just, I don't know. I'm not scared of them at all, if I'm being honest. Maybe that'll come to bite me someday. But like right now, I look at them and I just go, that's a first round exit next year. Good game. try it again the next year with Tatum, I guess. But I think that they might even try, like you said, maybe to try to stealth tank a little bit
Hmm.
and, get another good draft pick in there and try to go after it the next year, use Simons's money or whatever to, trade for someone else. Or if that pick ends up good, use that pick and Simons's money to trade for someone, whatever. They'll figure it out later on. But I think this year is basically a throwaway. Um, Milwaukee Bucks are an interesting one.
Yeah.
You want to talk about active? I mean, these guys, they've re-signed a number of guys. They've re-signed Kevin Porter Jr. They've re-signed Bobby Portis, re-signed Torian Prince, re-signed Jericho Sims, former
King.
Knick,
Shooting lefty these days, by the way.
shooting lefty threes or whatever in practice now. Crazy. Re-signed Gary Trent on another coup, to be honest, I thought. They got him for a really good deal last year, really good deal again this year, I think.
Crazy. Even better this year. Yeah, 2 for $7 million, I think, with a player option. Second, you're crazy.
Which
But
is
yeah, go
which is crazy. And then move heaven and earth, absolute heaven and earth to get Miles Turner
ahead. Hmm.
on this team. Cut Damian Lillard, waive and stretch him. So the 20 million on the books for the next 5 years for them to deal with that. Brooke Lopez leaves for the Clippers. So I think a pretty clear upgrade from Lopez to Turner. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems like Giannis is staying put, but I don't think I'm any more scared of this team. I'm putting them. I think that it's still going to work out where they're going to end up in some part of the bracket where they probably don't face the Knicks until like a potential Easter Conference Finals again, because I feel like they might still be like a 4 or 5 seed, something like that, and the Knicks will
Hmm.
hopefully be a 2-3 seed again, or maybe even a 1 seed. I guess a 1 seed would mean they'd have to face the 4 or 5, but um, I don't know. I just find myself looking at them and going, it just reeks of like, except for there are different points in their careers, obviously, and Giannis has won a title, but the way that they're shuffling things around, it reminds me so much of like the end of LeBron's first tenure in Cleveland,
Hmm.
where every year they would just like move heaven and earth, get some new guy, be like, this is the answer, Antoine Jameson, this is it. And then it would just be like great regular season, flame out in the playoffs. And that would just happen. And I just feel like this team, to me, on paper, just doesn't look like they're any more of a threat to potentially challenge for another title this year than they were before they got Miles Turner.
Yeah, I'm with you at the end of the day. I don't, this is a whole nother conversation. I don't totally get the day move in a league where you see the Pacers and Celtics after finals runs are scrambling to get below the aprons. Like they will have $22 million they can't operate with for the next 5 years, a little bit less, depending on what Dame signs for with another team. But that is just like hand tied behind your back to the nth degree. That is incredibly tough to construct a title contender that way. For next year specifically, they're a little younger. They'll play a little bit faster. You need a stretch 5 around Giannis, and Turner at this point in his career is obviously a major upgrade on Brooke Lopez, especially on the defensive end in terms of mobility. Like you can't pick on him the way the Knicks just brutalized Brooke Lopez with Jalen Brunson the last couple of seasons. That being said, like I don't really see how that makes them better when you're also losing Damian Lillard in that conversation. They get more interesting if Bradley Beal ends up there. Seems like he's going to be waived and stretched by the Suns, and I think it'd be very funny if then he's the Damian Lillard replacement. And that would kind of be an ideal spot for him to show off what he can do. Obviously, right now, Gary Trent Jr., he thinks he's going to be that guy, but if Bradley Beal is back and had a little career rejuvenation there, I don't know. I think they'll be interesting. I think they'll be fun. I could see a world where Giannis goes supernova and they get to 50 wins. I just don't see any world where they can threaten the Knicks in the playoffs. So I am going low to moderate, just out of respect for Giannis being incredible. All right, let's go rapid fire. The last one I really wanted to talk about, because the only one I would say is a quote unquote threat to the New York Knicks, is the Philadelphia 76ers. Everyone can moan and groan about that. Didn't really do a ton this offseason. Biggest news was they drafted VJ Edgecombe, who looked absolutely fantastic. I watched that whole first summer league game. I think 28, 10, and 4. Monster athlete, got to his spots, made shots. They'll get Jared McCain back healthy. Paul George presumably will be healthier. None of it matters if Joel Embiid isn't healthy come playoff time. And I don't know how you can count on that at this point. I think the only reason I put them even on the threat scale, Alex, is like if you happen to catch them in a first round series, Embiid has sat the whole regular season and he's healthy, he's raring to go. Even then, like you don't count on him to be available for a 6, 7-game series. A version of Philly with him is interesting just because they've had so many moves on the margins the last few seasons. I think Tyrese Maxey is a legitimate star at this point. I think McCain's awesome. I think Edgecombe can contribute. Paul George, again, in the right series and the right headspace can still be helpful. It's just, it's too many ifs for me.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. It's just like you got to prove that your team can stay healthy. Like they placed a huge bet on having a team full of injury. Well, I won't say full of. I won't like say like, oh, Jared McCain is like injury prone or something. That was, I think, bad luck. Like,
He's
but
TikTok prone, not injury prone.
he's TikTok prone. Yeah, exactly. But like you bet a lot on Embiid and George, and those guys just can't stay on the court. And I mean, Paul George now, there's all the kind of, I think, rightful talk about like, just is he podcasting too much or whatever? Like, is he not as focused on like his NBA career as he
I
once
need to note
was?
real quick, in round 2 of the playoffs, Locked On Knicks passed Podcast P on the basketball podcast chart. Just throwing that out
We
there.
did.
Throwing that out there. But
We
go
did.
ahead.
He did take a multiple month absence,
That
but we
helped, I
did
think. I think
we
that
did
helped.
we did pass him, I think, in his
Yeah.
return week. So
Mhm.
that was cool. Thanks,
Yeah.
Knicks fans. But yeah, I mean, I just don't really look at them as a threat either. It's like, sure, if this mythical beast of a healthy Sixers team can hit the playoffs as like a 7 seed or something and challenge the Knicks at the 2 seed or whatever, fine. Maybe we'll entertain that possibility again, like we did 2 years ago, and that was a good
Mhm.
series, and they did their thing. But we'll see. Also, I think poaching Yabu from them was a pretty big deal, so I
Mhm.
feel pretty good about that from the Knicks perspective. And then last one here, the Pacers more or less just let Miles Turner walk, and apparently we're not treating his free agency very seriously. They add Jay Huff, who I guess is like everyone's new per 36 darling. We'll see if he's
Mhm.
able to translate it to like starters minutes or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think without Hallie, my threat level for them goes pretty low. I question who's going to be out there handling the ball for them the whole time. I think TJ McConnell is great in spurts, but you can't count on him to be a full-time point guard. So they're going to have to find some other solution. Um, in that case, I don't know who it's going to be. So we'll just have to see what they're able to patch together. But again, I feel sort of similar to like Boston with them. They're missing their best player. They're missing the guy who's the biggest threat in the playoffs, much as it pains me to admit. I mean, that guy had ice water in his veins, Tyrese Halliburton, throughout the whole playoffs. So from that perspective, my threat level is pretty low with them as well. Low to moderate at best. And that's just like that. Moderate is just like respect to Rick Carlisle, who I think is still one of the better coaches in the NBA. But yeah, all in all, I don't find myself too afraid of them.
Yeah, you might hear the sirens in the background, so maybe that's alerting us that we're underrating the Pacers. But if they brought Turner back, I think they would have been much higher on this list, at least a moderate. Just respect for the infrastructure. Without that, there's not enough there. And they shout out to the Pelicans, they got their own pick back, so they have every incentive to miss the playoffs and maybe get a really good player out of it. But that'll do it for this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. We'll be back tomorrow talking through the Knicks hypothetical rotation. Join us for that. Plenty more to come, including Summer League talk this week on Locked On Knicks.